Thank you very much. Thank you for attending this meeting of the Universal Services Select Committee. This meeting is being recorded and webcast live on YouTube via the County Council's website. Filming is also permitted by the press and public, and so by remaining at the meeting, you are consenting to potentially being recorded. Please be aware that filming is only permitted in the room whilst the meeting is taking place. Filming during any breaks or elsewhere in the building is not permitted. We are not expecting a fire drill, but in the event that there is a fire alarm, please exit via reception and follow everyone across the Great Hall. We're hoping the building works is also stopped for the duration of this meeting. If it does start up again, we will see if we can do something about that. Toilets. Facilities can be found to the right when you leave the hall. Hearing loop. This room is fitted with an infrared hearing loop which is permanently switched on. You will need either a neck loop if you use a hearing aid or headphones for amplified sound. Both are available on request from reception. I'd like to welcome all members to this meeting, as well as executive members and those who are here to observe and to speak. So welcome, thank you. Members, we have a busy agenda, and it's therefore important that we make the most efficient and effective use of the time available. Please can I therefore ask members to be succinct in both your questions and contributions to the debate, so that all members have an opportunity to contribute to the scrutiny of the items in the time available. If members want to propose amendments to the recommendations, I would appreciate it if you could make your proposed amendments known at the start of the debate. However, if an amendment arises out of the debate, it can still be introduced at a later stage. I just want to remind members that any amendments should be in writing and must be proposed and seconded. I should tell members at this stage that I have received in writing a proposal for item 5B, passenger transport, from Councillor Jackie Branson, so she'll be making an amendment in that debate. And obviously that has to be proposed, which she's doing, and it will be seconded. When it comes to voting, we will take any proposed amendments in reverse order and then vote on the substantive recommendations. Moving on to the agenda. Item 1. I would like to invite Caroline Rosa to confirm the apologies for this meeting. Caroline.
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Barry Dunning, and Councillor Juliet Henderson is in attendance as a substitute member. Councillor David Drew, Councillor Rupert Curl and Councillor Martin Todd is in attendance as a substitute member, and Councillor Sarah Pankhurst and Councillor Malcolm Wallace is in attendance as a substitute member.
Thank you, Caroline. Item 2, declarations of interest. Members are welcome to disclose any declaration of interest when we get to the main item. Item 3, deputations. We have no deputations to today's meeting. However, County Councillor Jackie Porter has requested to speak to the meeting. Councillor Porter, you will have 10 minutes to speak. After that, you're welcome to either stay, to observe, or to leave the meeting. Jackie, please take the lectern.
Thank you very much. I'm speaking as spokesperson for young people. I note the paper and see the connection between school services and community services. But I also note that in the paper it talks about quotes that old and disabled will be affected by many of the cuts. But I wanted to just raise the point that young people will be affected too. Many young people up to the age of 17 travel by bus, including travel to college and training when they're up to 18 or 19. The cost is high and restricts access to education, and a barrier is the change that we're proposing today. A bus, for instance, from Old Alresford has recently stopped, and it means that the students have got yet another barrier to getting to college effectively. They have to walk a couple of miles before they can get on a bus. So I'm really making the point that I agree with the principle of trying out the principle of joining up community transport with school transport, but I am concerned about the unintended consequences of that. It could mean that we're ending up with smaller vehicles on the road. At the moment we have many double-decker buses. Smaller vehicles, if it's run by a community transport system or joining up with a school transport system, could mean that we have more vehicles on the road than we currently do at the moment. So is that effective? The cost of running those, if we start bringing them into community transport or shared transport, could be that we have more complicated costs, and the more that those run, the more infrastructure they'll need, which will be greater overhead. So I am a little bit concerned about pushing more onto community transport. Hampshire County Council a while ago demonstrated 3 pieces of work to us in a member briefing about 3 trials which were done to improve social connection through public transport. Many of you may have watched that and seen it at the same time. And all 3 had positives, but the main value was actually meeting on the bus itself. And I think this is true for younger people and older people too. I just wanted to raise particularly the fact that we keep talking about older people and disabled people, but the effect on younger people is enormous. We know that many younger people now choose not to have a car, and they hope not to have a car, but end up resorting to a car because it's the only transport they can get, particularly in rural areas, that works for them. And I really am urging us to think seriously about the impact on young people as well as older people in your deliberations today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. You will be aware that the Committee for Children and Young People, chaired by Councillor Henderson, has sent a letter to this committee. That letter is online, and hopefully all members will have seen that, and that will be referred to later on. I would also like to invite Councillor Bill Withers to speak to the committee regarding the letter I received from him yesterday in his capacity of Chairman of HASC, and which is again provided with the papers for today's meeting following HASC meeting on Friday. Councillor Withers, do you want to make any comment now? You're welcome to take the lecture if you'd like to. Thank you very much. Councillor Withers has pointed out, if those online didn't hear that, there are many members of HASC on this committee as well, and that they are perfectly free and able, and I'm sure will contribute to the debate with those views that were raised on Friday when we come to that item. Item 4, Chairman's announcements. And you'll be glad that I have no announcements other than to talk about the working group. The working group report was received at the previous meeting and will be as relevant today as we continue throughout this process and consider today's streams. A copy of the working group report has been appended under item 5 of the agenda, and I would like to invite Councillor Branson to make any comments on behalf of the working group on the 2 items coming forth for scrutiny today. Councillor Branson.
Thank you, Chairman. The working group, as I said, it was the report is the result of conscientious work by the whole panel, and I'd like to thank all the members of the group of all parties for their work and contributions, and the officers for their support. What I would like to emphasise to the Select Committee and to any public or residents, that we spent a lot of time looking at considering all the contributions from organisations and individuals to the public consultations. Although none of us were elected to make these savings, we all wanted to ensure that the effect on our residents would be mitigated as much as possible. As regards to the highways winter services, I think we considered the fact that we hadn't looked at these for many, the service hasn't been reviewed for many years, and there has been changes in weather and travel patterns which might necessitate and enable change as well as reducing budgets. As a possible mitigation, we suggested by the way of county councils working more closely with local communities to promote the use of grip bins and as many residents' concerns relating to footways as much as and more than roads. On the second item, I will come to that when we get to it.
Thank you, Councillor Branson. Moving on to item 5, pre-scrutiny of the SP25 savings proposals. The cover report summarises the 2 streams being looked at during the meeting today, as well as the draft report for Cabinet. The 2 streams are to be scrutinised separately as items 5A and 5B. So we will move on to 5A, Highways Winter Services. I would like to introduce the Head of Universal Service, Patrick Blogg, to present the stream and the appendix. Patrick, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. There are 2 principal items that I will cover today. Appendix 2 of the report is the savings proposals for highways winter services, and Appendix 3, which are the proposals for passenger transport. Both of these are included under cover of a brief introductory report from me. I would say, additionally, also included in the documents you have in front of you is a draft report for Cabinet on the 14th of October. This report includes 2 appendices just mentioned, and also the other 5 Universal Services proposals covered in other Universal Services Select Committees. I was not proposing to go into any detail in the draft Cabinet report, as it is there for information, but I would flag the contextual information within that sets out the budget context against which we have prepared these proposals. This is included in paragraph 9, which includes the sentence, "Whilst further, more detailed work needs to be undertaken, it is likely that the County Council will face a revised budget gap of at least £175 million before accounting for the SP25 savings, which is a £43 million increase on the previous £132 million for the next financial year." Against this backdrop, my Directorate has prepared 7 proposals that have been consulted on. I will now introduce the first of these that are for consideration for members today. So turning to Appendix 2 of the draft Cabinet report, Highways Winter Service. The first appendix to the Cabinet report that I will present is for Highways Winter Services. It contains 3 recommendations for Cabinet. The first is to note the outcome of the 2024 Future Services consultation in relation to the proposal to reduce the annual budget for Highways Winter Services by £1 million. The second is that the County Council undertakes a review and then updates its Highways Winter Services in consideration of changes to travelling behaviours and updates to national guidance. Further details on this recommendation are contained within the report. The third recommendation is delegated authority for implementation of these proposals. I'm now going to briefly present a summary of the paper. The criteria that the County Council uses to determine which routes to include in its winter service maintenance service was established using historic national guidance. Current treatment routes were devised in the early 2000s, and national guidance has changed, as well as changes to the road network itself, traffic patterns, and some roads simply not meeting the current criteria. Furthermore, travelling and commuting patterns have evolved, not least since the COVID-19 pandemic, with more working from home, home deliveries, and different reasons for people needing to travel. This has changed the way people use the road network. In addition, there have been changes to the bus networks and routes, creation of new roads, new developments, and indeed new schools. It is against this backdrop it is proposed to undertake a complete review of how the County Council delivers its Highways Winter Service, and then update the service provision as a result. This would result in a reduction of £1 million to the cost of the service, contributing to the SP25 revenue savings proposals. The review would include revising the road selection criteria in line with current national guidance, updating the treated networks, and the implementation of other service efficiency opportunities that would arise as a consequence of these changes. Now moving to the consultation feedback, the proposal received 4,665 responses. You will note that 60% of respondents disagreed with the proposal, with 27% in agreement. The highest proportion of responses raised concerns regarding possible road safety issues and maintaining current service levels. You will see within paragraph 57 in the report a summary table that covers the key themes and concerns from the consultation, alongside our responses against these. Again, much more detail is contained within the report. Turning now to road safety, the proposed reduction in the Priority 1 network, which is the main network treated during the winter period and takes most of the traffic, is around 5%, or around 260 miles, which is a reduction of approximately 6 treatment routes. Putting this in context, under the current arrangement, the vast majority of the road network, approximately 65%, is not routinely treated. It is already accepted in law that not every road can be treated and that the revised network would follow the latest criteria from national guidance. If the proposal is approved, the new Priority 1 network would be optimised to reduce the number of individual routes operated, with cost savings on vehicles, maintenance, fuel, and resources to manage the operational delivery of the service. This would be coupled with other measures, including exploring innovative route-based forecasting, which provides forecast information for each individual route and a more targeted approach to treating these. As part of this proposal, the Priority 2 and community routes would also be comprehensively reviewed and updated. It is anticipated that some of the roads that may be removed from the Priority 1 network may subsequently be added to the Priority 2 or community routes, if considered appropriate. Also, in response to some of the consultation feedback and the impact of roads being reduced from the Priority 1 network, a review of roadside salt bins would also be undertaken, and this could result in relocating existing bins, providing some new bins, or in some cases, removing bins. An important point covered within the paper is that in the event that a particular severe winter period is encountered, this proposed reduction in funding would not expose the County Council to additional risks where the service could not be delivered due to lack of funding. In extreme situations, supplementary funding is provided by the County Council to ensure its statutory duty to keep roads free of snow and ice as far as reasonably practicable is maintained. Chair, these are the key points of my introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blogg. At this point, I would like to invite questions from the committee on the appendix. So does anyone have any questions? Councillor Todd, Martin, you're first.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm trying to understand quite what we're signing up for here. And so I put the old criteria and the new criteria next to each other and try to understand whether it's a question of the road system having changed and broadly the same criteria leading to different outcomes, or changing criteria. And I had some questions, partly because I just didn't fully understand. The only criteria I could see in the old criteria that was being withdrawn, as far as I could tell, and it'd be helpful to get clarity on this, is, quote, other routes busy during peak traffic periods, because that seemed to be the only one that didn't feature in the second list. And what seemed odd was that actually the first two of the new criteria almost seemed to extend it, because it talked about roads within carriageway hierarchy 1, 2 and 3, which is all A roads, some B roads, some C roads, and then roads within carriageway hierarchy 4 that are traffic sensitive. And I didn't quite know what that meant either. So I suppose my question is, throughout you're saying the criteria are different. It's not entirely sure how they're different, and more clarity on that would be helpful. And then I had a sort of second question about when you get to the point of actually saying, here's our road network, is there an intention or a process whereby divisional members will actually find out what's going to happen and have a chance to comment before it's published? And actually there's a third point, which is I don't quite understand the role of geography in all of this, because I've got some really steep hills, for example, which I'd have thought were more important to grit than something that's completely flat and level. And similarly, we all know that there are places within our divisions where you get a really strong frost on a particular night and icy conditions more than in other places. And I wondered how that was taken into account. So quite a few questions there. Apologies for that, Mr.
Thank you. I think I've written them all
Councillor
down.
Carter,
So, Patrick, you want to have a go at those? So more clarity on the criteria, how the routes are published, and the role of geography, the 3 points I wrote down, summarising Councillor Todd's questions, I hope.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Todd, for your questions. What I may do is come to my colleague shortly, some of the more technical questions around gritting, particularly where we talk about hills and the salting of hills and how they maintain on our network. Just taking your first point around the criteria and the changes to those, much of our criteria is driven by what the guidance we receive from central government, the Department for Transport, and that directly flows into our routes that we look at and the criteria that we develop as a result of that. So the changes are driven principally by the national guidance that comes out. And as I mentioned in my update, we've not looked at this since perhaps the early 2000s, and that has evolved over time. And it certainly seems right that we go back to that national guidance and see how that flows into the changes. The second one around members and how they will find out, you'll see within the proposal that actually this is about doing a full review, and out of that review will come a change in the network, how it's treated, the Priority 1 network, and the changes we see as a result of that. And what we will be doing is when that work is done, we'll be publishing that work because it's done objectively against that criteria from national guidance, which will come out, and that of course will be shared with members. Turning to a third point on geography, I think I may bring in Tim Lawton and Pete Rooney, my colleagues from Highways area, and Tim, Assistant Director for Highways Engineering and Transport, who may be able to pick up that specifically. Tim.
Thank you, Patrick. I'll have a go at all three questions as well, perhaps add a bit more detail if that's okay. Firstly, on the criteria, I just want to be clear that the national guidance changes periodically. The last time we did a major review was probably in the late 90s, early 2000s, and that was against national criteria that would have been in place at that time. Of course, it's changed a number of times since then, and of course we take notice of what those changes are. And to be clear, the County Council has never not been compliant with national guidance. But what has happened is, over the years, there have been new roads, new infrastructure, more bus routes. So our network has grown to the point that now we're probably way in excess of what the national guidance has set down. So this is an opportunity to review all of our routes against the current national guidance to make sure that our routes are compliant and that we're treating what we need to treat and not more. So I don't know whether that answers your first question.
Yes, Councillor Dodd.
Not, I suppose if I interpret what you're saying, because if I look at that new criteria, if anything, the new criteria seem more expansive than the old criteria. So is what we're saying that we've actually expanded our route beyond both the old and the new criteria, and effectively what this is about is, dare I say it, the much loved theme of the current administration of cutting back to the legal minimum?
I'd maybe couch it in a different way, in that it's bringing us back into line with the national guidance. I think we are beyond where the national guidance line is, and we are treating much more of the network than we need to. So this is an opportunity to take that current guidance, and again, the guidance that is in place now has not changed significantly since the guidance that was in place, when we last did this. But this is an opportunity to sort of, if you like, press reset, come up with a new set of routes that is compliant, fit for purpose, and fit for the future.
Thank you. Did you want to talk on the other two things?
Yeah,
as well as geography.
The other thing I wanted to say, it's kind of your third point, which is about the geography. And there's quite a lot of science that sits behind this service. And we do take into account geography and topography. And without going into detail that's outside of the paper, Hampshire has got distinct climatic domains. So obviously in the north of Hampshire, it's high ground. The southern part of the county is coastline. And that brings with it different weather patterns. So we do take those into account within the service. But one of the primary considerations, which I think is articulated in the paper, and it's certainly set out within the national guidance, is we take into account primarily traffic usage, the road classification, and not just the topography. So I accept that there are steep hills, all across Hampshire. It's the nature of our county. But, we don't necessarily prioritise a road just because it's a steep hill. There are other factors that we would take into account before just looking at the, whether it's on a hill or not.
Yes, Councillor Todd.
Based on sort of previous life experiences, I mean, is there also analysis done of where accidents happen when it is icy? Because there can be certain areas, certain hills, certain roads where it is kind of known that you suddenly get a hot spot as soon as it's icy. Is that something that's also factored in as well?
Not really, no. I mean, it still comes back to sort of road classification and typical usage, because you could have rural routes that, you know, for whatever reason, take a very, you know, a small proportion of the sort of total traffic that uses our network. If there is a pattern of incidents, then that won't necessarily be included in a treatment. You know, we may choose to cite a grit bin there, say, for the local community to use as and when they need to, but it wouldn't necessarily trigger a routine treatment.
Thank you, Mr. Lawton. Are there any other questions that anyone has for the officers on the subject? Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to perhaps pick up on one of the issues that was raised there by Councillor Todd about review and coming back to members. I mean, one of the recommendations that you're asking us to approve, and I have to admit I'm a little surprised that it's included really, is delegated authority to just get on with it. Now, I can see that in one sense, but it does really rather preclude the fact that if you do a review, there's no suggestion to me in that when there's a delegated authority built in that actually, you know, we might get informed of the outcome, not necessarily that we will get an opportunity to perhaps have input on what that might be. And I just wondered, you know, what was your intention in using that delegated authority? Because I haven't seen any other committees putting that request in. I don't know if that's sort of, if I've understood what I'm trying to get at there.
Mr. Blogg.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Taylor. I mean, typically when we've done this work in the past, going back years, it is an operational matter for us to come up with. We have national guidance, we work within that national guidance, we have the criteria which aligns with that, and we work out operationally what we do in terms of treating our network, the priority 1, the priority 2, the community routes. And so what we would typically do, that delegation is there because we have the guidance, we work through it operationally, and we will come up with the optimal routes and the most efficient way to do that with the resources that we have that make sure we meet the guidance. What we would of course do is make sure we update members and keep members informed of how that's developing, but it is not there for consultation with members to be able to do that, what is an operational task as part of that work. But it's really important to us to make sure that what we do come up with is there for members to come and have a look at and make sure they understand what work is being done so they can feed that back to their communities. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor, did you follow up on that? Thank you, Mr. Blogg. That partially answers Councillor Todd's question about publishing, doesn't it? The more information you give us about the decisions and about the routes, the better informed we are to pass that on to our residents. So that publishing is a key part of what Councillor Taylor asked. We accept it's an operational decision, but the more information you're able to pass on to us, the more useful we will as councillors will find that. So thank you for that answer. Councillor Todd, do you have another? Before I ask Councillor Todd's second question, anyone else got any questions? Councillor Hiscock, then I'll come back to Councillor Todd. Councillor Hiscock.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask about pedestrian ways and particularly pedestrian footpaths, because it doesn't seem to be very much notice taken of them in terms of gritting, and a lot of these routes are very heavily used, and as Councillor Todd said, are on hills, particularly around the university, for instance, where there's a heavy pedestrian use, and there is no suggestion that any of these footpaths were ever going to be treated. Whose responsibility would it be if they had to be treated? And is there any way that we can at least assess the risk of not treating them? Thank you.
Mr. Blogg.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Hiscock. Two things on pedestrian ones. I'm going to hand to Pete Rooney, who can cover the latter part in a minute about the responsibilities for treatment of pedestrian routes. But there is a consequential benefit of where the priority routes are gritted because of the way the grit is dispersed, and that often will go across pedestrian routes, and you'll be aware that many pedestrian routes are covered where they're on priority networks, where they just benefit from the grit spreading beyond the road layout itself. I mean, in terms of responsibility, Pete, are you happy to pick up that question, please?
Yes, we do have a policy for treating footways. The problem is the majority of our precautionary salting is carriageway based, and that's because most freezing conditions we have are short duration events. It might freeze in the morning, then it'll warm up through the course of the morning, and it's not an issue. So the winter treatment is priority. The priority for the winter treatment is essentially on the carriageways. Now we do salt footways and treat footways, but it's really when we have prolonged prolonged freezing conditions, snow conditions, things like that, when resources allow, and we bring in other resources when we can, and then we will turn attention to footways as well. But we don't treat footways generally because the freezing events are such short durations. It just wouldn't be practically possible to treat those locations.
Councillor Hiscott.
Follow up on that, if I may. I'm thinking also about the pedestrian areas, like, for instance, Winchester High Street, which is a highway and is pedestrianised. But at the moment, there is sunshine on some side of it, but not on the others in the morning. So the frost on a heavy frosty day will just remain. There would be a risk. Is there any who does that? Thank you.
Mr. Brooke, do you want to try and answer that? Is that beyond the scope of this, or do you want to answer that as part of this process?
Thank you, Chair. I was going to come back to a previous point, actually, but I agree. I think the point raised is beyond the scope of this paper.
So, Todd, you had a second question.
Yeah. You've given us the criteria for priority 1 routes, and I understand how that might work in a technical way in line with national guidance, but you're also asking for the ability to revise priority 2 and community routes. And I'm finding out that, firstly, you haven't provided any technical assessments on that, and secondly, surely the voice of the community has some role in community routes, or the community's representatives. And I'm just trying to understand how that's going to be decided, and again, how that can be done without input from community stakeholders.
Mr. Blogg.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Todd. I think the priority 2 routes and the community routes are ones which are mentioned treated subject to resources when we have significant freezing conditions as part of that. And so that's where that's picked up as part of that route. So they are as distinct from the priority 1 route. Tim, are you happy to provide more detail on that, please?
Yeah, I'm not sure there is any clear national guidance for secondary routes and community routes. So it's very much sort of local judgment. And, perhaps that is an area where we can involve the communities more to help us target resources. But our priority is always the priority 1 network, because that's what takes the bulk of the traffic. So there is more flex with the other treatment routes. It's less regimented.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, I'm going to ask if there are any amendments that are going to be made to the report. I'm assuming that's a no on the amendments. No. Sorry, Todd.
I do think we maybe need to look at recommendation number 4, and possibly have something along the lines of.
I'm struggling. I've got 3 recommendations. Okay, I apologise. Carry on.
Oh yeah, sorry. It's recommend. It starts counting at number 2, which obviously makes life a bit more complicated. But the third recommendation, which is currently numbered as number 4, maybe we need to have something in reference to any reduction in priority 2 or community route networks will seek community and county councillor input, or something like that.
Councillor Todd, do you want an adjournment to write this in writing? Because that's what we require.
Yeah, I mean, it would be about a minute, but yes, probably if that's what's needed.
In which case, we're adjourning for a minute to Councillor Todd to write an amendment about the last of the recommendations. So this adjourned to allow that to happen. Thank you.
Who should I email it?
Something that's usually called on in quite short order. So I wonder if actually this could be noted in the minutes that that the officers will engage with the members as part of that, rather than a formal recommendation.
Councillor Todd, are you happy with that, or would you like to formally put in an amendment? The choice is yours.
If I can have confirmation that the minute will go to Cabinet, I mean, that's not an unusual thing, or that you would represent that view to Cabinet.
I can confirm, I will write a letter to Cabinet putting that minute in there, so I can confirm your question, that will be confirmed to Cabinet as part of the minutes. Yes, thank you.
I think if it's, as long as it's written down somewhere and is going to go in front of Cabinet, I mean, obviously it may be that everybody disagrees with me, but I'm seeing head nodding in all directions. Is it worth your asking whether people generally agree that should be forwarded?
Thank you. What I'm going to suggest is we have the debate.
Okay.
And if after the debate we still feel that there needs to be a different process than being written in the minutes by the chairman of the committee to Cabinet, and whether members confirm that they are happy with that, then I propose that we go ahead with that process. So I'm going to open up the debate.
If you summarise it in your summary of the debate, I'm sure that, I mean, that in most places that would be considered sufficient if it ended up in the minutes.
So we have, you will understand, moved into a debate on the report and the potential amendment or lack of amendment. So I invite. I apologise. We are now going to go back to public session. So can you restart the public broadcast once again? Yes, this has been broadcast live once again. So I'm going to invite members to take part in the debate on the report and the discussion about whether the minutes in writing to the Cabinet are sufficient rather than needing an amendment. So I invite any members to take part in the debate who wish to do so. No members wish to take part in the debate. I'd like to invite Patrick Blogg for closing remarks. Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. No further remarks. Thank you.
I'd like to invite Kirsty North, whether she'd like to make, as executive member, any comment at this stage, or will hold comments to the end of both items. Councillor North.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I will speak at the end of the meeting, but just to say some of the Cabinet members are here and listening, and we can certainly hear what's going on. So thank you for your comments, Councillor Todd.
So just to summarise, before we come to the vote, that the minutes of this meeting will be made in writing to Cabinet to make sure that they are aware of the committee's desire to be kept informed and consulted on the results of the operational decision to delegate the item, or the item 3, if that's approved. And I think that's what you are asking for. I will summarise the minutes that local members will be kept informed about the decision being made, the delegated decision being made by the Executive Director. So it's a question of making sure that the process for keeping councillors informed is in place, and to make sure Cabinet looks at that when they come to this item. Mr. Blogg, are you happy with that?
I'm not entirely sure I'm happy with it. I think I would quite like to know that a conversation had been had before the final decision was taken, so that we had a chance to express our views rather than being informed after the decision was taken. So I'm happy to propose an amendment on that basis.
I believe the issue is, what we're voting on today is on priority routes, and what this discussion about is on the priority 2 and community routes. I don't think there is any discussion about the priority routes. That is the officers making a delegated decision on that. What Councillor Todd is discussing is whether there can be some consultation on the priority 2 and community route process, which I think is separate to what we're actually voting on. And I suggest that we actually think about that coming back to this committee on that issue subsequent to the decision being made about priority one routes, because I think it is an important issue about the involvement of local councillors in community routes, but I think that is not what we're discussing today, and I'm sure that's... Hang on, I'm just going to check Mr Blogg, then I'll come back to Councillor Todd. Mr Blogg.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think that's right. Priority one routes, that isn't the point up for discussion now. Priority one's an operational matter. In fact, priority two and community routes are again an operational matter, but we can work and find a way to make sure that we do engage with members to make sure they are informed as part of that operational matter.
Okay, I think the debate was informed and consulted in that process rather than at the end of that process. I think that was the local views may be slightly different, and I think it could have an important part of that discussion.
Sorry, Chair, that's understood, yes.
Yes, so essentially, if the third recommendation is interpreted as revisions to priority one and what the bulk of the paper talks about and any consequent changes to priority two and community route networks, then that's one thing. The power we've given is to revise all of them. So that was why I was saying, particularly because we've got the priority one routes in front of us, we need to have that pre-information. I think that's what you said, and if that's fine, I just think it is important that local views are sought before the decision is taken.
Thank you, Councillor Dodd. My understanding is that Mr Blogg has agreed that if we are going to revise the priority two and community route treatments, which is a periodic service, not a statutory service, that there will be a consultation involving local members on that reprioritisation before that decision is implemented. And I think that will satisfy everyone. We're talking about the statutory obligation of priority one. The second is, as resources allow, we all understand what resources are and what they're not. If there is going to be any revision of that, there will be a consultation involving local members on that process. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarification, and on page 45 of our papers, it does confirm that priority two and community routes will be comprehensively reviewed and updated. So it is part of this proposal. We're not just limited to priority one. So I think the point that Councillor Todd is making is reasonably relevant, because whilst we might have national guidance in relation to priority one, what I think I'm hearing is that we don't for priority two, and therefore that's sort of, you know, for us to decide, as it were. Have I got that right? That's our decision to make, and therefore I think what Councillor Todd is saying is because of that, because there's no national guidance or framework for that priority two, and priority two is clearly included in this proposal, there might need to be further discussion with and consultation with members rather than being informed. I think that's what you're saying. Is that, Councillor Todd?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I think that's exactly what he's saying, and I think that is effectively what the committee is requesting. That it's the key phrase is as resources allow, and that is the debate to be had about what resources there are for priority two and the community routes. And if there is going to be more work done on those, that there should be a consultation involving local members in that process. I think that's what Mr Blogg agreed earlier on.
Can I just make a comment on that point, Chair, if I may? I think we've covered the priority routes. I think that's well understood. For the priority two and the community routes, I think you made a very good point that subject to the resources and keeping it proportionate for the resources that we have. And I think just being careful with that formal consultation approach. It can't really be a formal consultation for all members for the priority two and the community routes, but we will find an appropriate mechanism to make sure we engage local members as part of that discussion to be informed when we are looking at priority two and our community routes. Thank you.
I'm going to suggest we bring it back to this committee as part of our work programme to examine that exact issue about priority two and our community routes in due course, if you're happy with that, to add that to our work programme for the next year. If everyone feels that's an appropriate way for the scrutiny committee to look at that decision and to be involved in it, I feel that answers most of the questions that Councillor Todd and Councillor Taylor have raised. I'm seeing nods.
And your previous point, the previous agreement, which is any specifics to a division, the divisional member will be involved before the decision is taken.
That I think is understood. That it's not just the members of this committee; it's the scrutiny committee for the councillors of the process. So I think that's understood.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to move on at this point to the recommendations which are on page 45 of the pack, and I'm going to read them out. The numbering of the recommendations in the paper is slightly different to the ones I'm going to read out. So I'm going to read out that the Select Committee support the following recommendations to Cabinet. The Cabinet approves the following recommendations. 1. To note the outcome of the 2024 Future Services consultation in relation to the proposal to reduce the annual budget for highways winter services by £1 million. 2. That Hampshire County Council undertakes a review and then updates its highway winter services in consideration of changes to travelling behaviours and recent updates to national guidance. The review and subsequent implementation are predicted to provide annual budget savings of £1 million from April 2025. This will be achieved through the revision and implementation of revised winter service treatment routes developed in accordance with current national guidelines, as well as through operational efficiency savings arising from the changes. 3, that authority is delegated to the Director of Universal Services in consultation with the Executive Member for Highways and Waste to implement these decisions, including to progress and make any necessary arrangements to agree and implement the revisions to Priority 1, Priority 2 and Community Route treatment networks. Members, can I have all those in favour of that recommendation please show? Thank you. All those against? And abstentions? Thank you. That recommendation is carried. Moving on to item 5B. As I mentioned at the beginning, letters have been received from both the Chairman of Children's and Young Persons Committee and from HASC to myself as Chairman of this committee, and both those letters are on the website. So I won't go through the details now because members of the public, if you're interested in what was written, they are publicly available as of this morning. I would like to introduce again Patrick Blogg, who's going to present the stream and the appendix on passenger transport. Mr. Blogg.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to cover Appendix 3, passenger transport. The second appendix to the Cabinet report that I will present is for passenger transport. It contains 6 recommendations. The first is to note the outcome of the 2024 Future Services consultation in relation to the proposals on the future of the passenger transport provision. The second recommendation is to note the changes to the proposals contained in the current paper from those that were set out in the Future Services consultation as a result of the responses received from the consultation itself. The third recommendation is the removal of County Council's discretionary revenue funding for the services identified. The next recommendation is to approve a revised approach in which both community transport and school transport are jointly commissioned and delivered together, thereby maintaining a level of service to meet the transport needs of older and disabled people, whilst reducing the funding required for school transport. This will generate a consequential saving of approximately £500,000 per annum for the County Council. The final 2 recommendations are for delegated authority for implementation of the proposals. I'm now going to present a brief summary of the paper covering the background to the passenger transport savings proposals, the feedback received through the consultation, and a proposed way forward. As a result of both the feedback received from the Future Services consultation, and in particular the potential impacts on older and disabled people, and work undertaken that established a link between changes proposed in the consultation and likely cost increases for the County Council's statutory school transport provision, significant changes have been made to the proposals that were previously consulted on. You will see in the report the revised proposals have lower levels of service reductions and the implementation of a revised approach that jointly commissions and delivers both passenger transport and school transport services. These revised proposals also ensure that the County Council is meeting its statutory duties under the Transport Act 1985 with regards to the transport needs for older and disabled people. These changes would result in the potential saving being reduced from around £1.7 million originally proposed to £1,087,000, comprising £587,000 for passenger transport reductions and £500,000 achieved through implementation of a revised approach to jointly commission and deliver passenger transport and school services. You will see much more detail set out within the report. The County Council currently spends around £2.7 million per year directly supporting community transport and supported local bus services. £1.1 million of this is ring-fenced funding from the Bus Services Operators Grant. Proposals were drawn up to make savings of £1.7 million against the £2.7 million that the County Council currently spends on passenger transport services, with savings coming from discretionary services from the County Council's funds. You will see, set out in paragraphs 12 and 13, some of the legal considerations associated with this. The original savings proposals that were consulted on included withdrawing County Council funding for Dial-A-Ride, Call and Go, taxi shares, minibus group hire services, and Wheels to Work. Additionally, proposals were consulted on for supporting local bus services and some relating to discretionary funding for the concessionary travel scheme, which is in addition to the prescribed English National Concessionary Travel Scheme, which has a ring-fence budget of £11.2 million. Set out in the report are revised proposals for consideration by Cabinet. Paragraphs 53 to 70 detail the revised community transport approach, including combining community transport services with school transport provision. This would retain the majority of transport for community transport services. There are services funded by discretionary budgets which do form part of the savings proposals, and these are detailed in paragraphs 71 through to 118. Where there is a direct established link between the reduction in funding towards supported local bus services and increased costs for the statutory provision of school transport, the services are retained. The table in paragraph 43 includes the principal themes and concerns raised as part of the consultation. I would just reiterate, though, that the proposals in the report in front of you have changed significantly as a result of the feedback, and you will see within the same table that responses are included based upon the revised proposals. In summary, the final recommendations being made to Cabinet have been informed by the feedback from the Future Curves Services consultation alongside other relevant factors. The proposal set out in the consultation originally accounted for £1.7 million. However, these have been refined as I've outlined, and the revised savings proposals now total £1,087,000. By proposing these changes, savings can be made whilst at the same time ensuring that the County Council is meeting its legislative duties and providing a more efficient and joined-up approach to community transport and supported services. I'm joined here today by Tim Lawton, Assistant Director for Highways, Engineering and Transport, but also by Lisa Cook, Head of Passenger Transport, and we'd be happy to take any questions in respect of the paper. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Blogg. Before we go to questions, I would like to invite Councillor Branson to make any comments as Chairman of the Working Group on the passenger transport process for the Working Group. Councillor Branson.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, Patrick. I mean, it is good that you have taken a lot of our proposals in hand. We noted that there was a high level of opposition to these proposals, and we expressed concern of the potential impact on the vulnerable members of our community, especially older and younger people and those with disabilities. But in view of the letters that we received, I have composed an amendment some of it I think you probably well have covered, but I don't know. Have you got a copy of the amendment to put up on the screen?
I think, Councillor Vance, we will go
If not, I will
into
read it.
questions first and then the
Yeah,
amendments
that's
after.
right.
That's okay.
I have an amendment.
Thank you. Explaining the process, there is an amendment that has been tabled. We will come to that subsequently. The first thing I'd like to do is invite questions from members to the officers on the report, on the revised report. So, Councillor Groves, you're first.
Well, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report and for thinking behind the ideas to improve. I'd like to ask for clarification on page 121 of the agenda, which is sub-appendix A. And I wonder if you could clarify, we've got a service, the 43, Flexford to Chandlersford and Eastleigh, with 0 annual passenger journeys. I wonder if you would just clarify exactly what that is. I see further down that page there's a 46 service from Chilworth to Lord's Hill. I'm raising that because it's relevant to what I'm just going to raise further on, and I just sort of like clarification on what that is. And then further down to page 128 of the report of Appendix A, there's a service 44 Hiltonbury to Winchester. I'm not certain what service that is, so I wonder if you could clarify, please. I think probably Lisa Cook will be able to answer that because I've raised it before with her. Also there's a 46 service on page 129, Winchester to North Baddesley. And that one refers to Hampshire County Council only fund a small proportion of these services, the rest is provided commercially. I wonder if you could please clarify what that is, please, just so I understand that, as that particular service has hardly any, it only operates once a day at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Groves. Pat.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your questions, Councillor Groves. I think as officers, we were not intending to go into very specifics around all the proposals set out in what are the detailed appendices, but I'm very happy to invite Lisa Cook to give some general comments on those proposals, particularly around the ones that you've made, Councillor Groves. Lisa, please.
Morning. So just very quickly, the 43 is a taxi share service and 0 passengers travelled in the year of the data represents on that taxi share service, but we needed to give a figure for the cost so that it was comparable with other services, hence why that's there. It simply isn't used or wasn't used in that year. The 44, absolutely, Councillor Groves, I apologise, that's a mistake. That ought to say to Eastleigh, not to Winchester. And the 46 service, at the time of writing this report, there was a commercial element to that service, the 461, which was removed earlier this year by Stagecoach, ready for writing the report. A significant amount of that service was commercial, but now you're right, only the supported element remains.
Thank you. Are there any other questions that people have? Councillor Groves, you want to come back?
Just a brief follow-up on that one, the last one. I think is, can you clarify, I mean, the 46 is just one service a day at the moment. The 461 service, which has already disappeared, that's a different number, not referred to in the report. So I think that needs clarifying too. Thank you.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Wallace.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the officers for the work they've done in responding to the feedback that they've had, and it's good to see that the cuts are significantly less than were originally forecast. But what I wanted to do, and when I looked at this paper, I wanted to go through and actually understand what those cuts actually meant. So I focused, and I'm afraid this is a little bit specific, but unfortunately, in order to understand the changes, I needed to go into a little bit of detail. So I looked at what was happening in my division. So firstly, the taxi share services. So one of the cuts proposed is to cut the 96 service, which is the service that covers my division. It covers Swanmore, Shewell Heath, Shedfield, that area. So that's going. Then it's also cuts to local bus services. So the plan would also be to cut the Meon Valley community bus route to Petersfield. In both cases, we're being told that the mitigation for this is that there is is local community transport scheme. So I'd like to understand a bit more about that. I mean, I actually contacted the Winchester's local community transport scheme this morning and spoke to them to understand what their capability was. Well, perhaps I'll let you answer first, and then perhaps I'll come back to that.
Thank you. Mr. Blogg.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Wallace. Could I just bring us back to the proposals that we put forward on the basis of the changes that we made as a result of the consultation, but also against the backdrop of the financial position we found ourselves in. I think, not to reiterate too much, but with the financial position, we've had to look at all discretionary funding within passenger transport. But what we've done is worked hard and looked quite innovatively at where we can combine school transport and community transport to make the best of the funding that we have, and only remove areas which don't have a consequential impact on the particular areas around the school transport and the adults health and care area as well. So it has meant that we've had to look at all areas, and if we take the taxi share information, and I'm not going into specifics here in respect of your particular ward, but the taxi share one, you'll see in there some quite significant figures where taxi shares range from, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lisa, around £7 to £460 for some journeys because of the use of those areas. So they are really significant in terms of the discretionary funding we've had. So we've, out of necessity, had to put forward quite significant proposals that address some of that discretionary funding that we need to remove. What I'm going to do is bring Lisa in, who might just be able to pick up some of those very specific points, but I'm hoping that we'll keep it relatively high level, because to get into each specific area and each specific point around this select committee is going to be challenging to cover that level of detail. Lisa.
Thank you. So just to confirm, the Meon Valley Community Bus, the funding we're proposing to withdraw is just the Wednesday service into Petersfield. The rest of the service is operated entirely on a voluntary basis by Meon Valley Community Bus, and it's down to them how they operate it and which routes they intend to cover. So it's just the 4,000 we spend on that one journey into Petersfield on a Wednesday. And yes, the 96 taxi share, you're right, that's going as a Monday to Friday service at the moment, and those passengers will have the opportunity, should these proposals be approved, to travel using the community transport instead, which offers a service to a destination. It might not be the same destination, but still offers people the ability to get out of their homes and access core services.
Thank you. I'd like to remind members, as Ms. Blogg just said, I think focusing on the minute detail of individual routes in our individual wards isn't necessarily going to help a great deal of the questions and the debate. I think members are very welcome to raise that matter in the debate. That's a matter for them, but asking questions about it, I think the report is relatively clear. Unless there are things that people are not clear about, I think that's a valid route for questioning. Councillor Wallace.
Yes. Thank you. I apologise going into detail, but I think it's important that we understand the impacts of these changes. I mean, this proposed cut is actually, if you look at it, it has the impact across the most protected characteristics of any of the cuts that we're looking at in SP25. It's affecting.
Councillor Wallace, I fully agree with what you're saying. I think it's a matter for the debate. It's not a matter for questions. So I absolutely think you're absolutely able to raise that issue in the debate when we come to debate. I don't think it's a subject for questions.
Could I follow up?
You may ask a question.
Thank you. So coming back to the couple of points we raised. So I talked to the community transport scheme that covers Winchester this morning. They are currently 100% of their usage is in Winchester City and the immediate area. The proposal is that these community transport schemes, as I understand it, the proposal is that these community transport schemes, they do school drop-offs in the morning, and in the evening, and then there is also a comment that we're going to have to renegotiate the contracts, and we're expecting that the size of the service is going to reduce, given that there's no more money. So, how do you see that working? That the community transport can effectively massively increase their coverage, given they've got less time and less resources?
Lisa, do you want to try and answer that?
Yes, sure. That's a really interesting question. So there's a number of factors there. Yes, the Winchester scheme at the moment is predominantly serving the city and the surrounding areas, but the specification for that scheme in the contract is for the entirety of the Winchester district. So whilst that might be where the demand is and where existing patterns of usage are, that doesn't mean that's the only place that can be served. It's just where patterns are at the moment. The proposal to put in additional school runs to community transport, the report tries to make it clear that that can only take place where it's practical and possible. So I don't envisage a case where every single community transport vehicle has a school run, primarily because not every community transport vehicle is contracted to run that length of operational day, and that would actually cost more. So not every vehicle, you've got to look at this model relies on the sector as a whole rather than individual vehicles in order to generate the savings. So not all vehicles will have a school contract attached. And also further down in the report, and I can find the paragraphs later, we talk about the introduction of new booking software. So the existing booking scheduling software for community transport is 25 years old. It's clunky. That's the polite way of putting it. We've through investment from the Future Transport Zone, we're introducing new booking software, and that new booking software, with human intervention too, will increase the efficiency of those services, just because it can combine more journeys more effectively because of the algorithm of the software. So it's a way of ensuring that if there are reduced periods of time in which community transport is operating, then we're making the best use of that time to enable the most number of passengers who we know are older and vulnerable to travel.
Thank you. I've got questions from Councillor Wade and Councillor Groves in that order. Councillor Wade first. Councillor, I do apologise. Councillor Irish.
Right, thank you. Yeah, Chairman, I note your comment about talking about individual services, but this is a very important question, really. It does affect an awful lot of people in my division. The 61 service from Eastleigh to Winchester serves the hospital. Now, if that's withdrawn, the disabled and elderly people that rely on that service to get to the hospital have got no way of getting to the hospital. So can we be told how my constituents in Eastleigh are going to get to the hospital if there's no number 61 bus?
Okay, as Patrick set out at the beginning with his introduction to this paper, the services we're proposing to retain, local bus services we're proposing to retain, are those where there's a clear and demonstrable link with school transport. The 61 service operates throughout the day and doesn't have a school transport element to it. Scholars don't use it, and certainly not entitled scholars don't use it, so those entitled to free school transport, hence the proposal that service is withdrawn. With regards to the how people get to the hospital, that is difficult, and that's something we're going to try and address. Should these proposals be approved, that's something we're going to try and address through our new tenders for community transport. Now, the difficulty there is that we're talking about lots of people in Eastleigh, which is Eastleigh, going to Winchester Hospital, which is outside of Eastleigh, but certainly those people along the route who live within the Winchester City Borough district, and travel to Winchester Hospital will be able to use the community transport services to access hospital appointments.
Councillor Groves, did you have a question?
No, I didn't have another. I think Councillor Todd did that.
Councillor Todd, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. I just had a question, because you're talking about the community transport, a reduced level of service, but you're also saying that it's co-funded. Now, I need to probably, just for clarity, declare a personal non-prejudicial interest in that I am leader of Winchester City Council, and they're referenced in the paper, and it's one of the co-funders. But obviously, interest isn't personal because I don't profit from it one way or another. But I'm just interested in the dynamic where we're sort of, what's the intention? You go out and say to partners, we're going to be reducing the service in this particular way. Is the assumption that everybody will continue funding on the same basis, or is it just sort of made on an agnostic basis? And then the other question I've got, so how exactly is that dynamic going to work in terms of reducing service and conversations with partners? The second question I had, which we haven't touched on, relates to the breakdown of what's happening with concessionary passes, where there's three elements. Restrictions on the bus-free travel before 9:30 and after 11 for people with disabilities. The withdrawal of the companion pass and the withdrawal of the pass for older people where there's infrequent bus services and they might need to get on one before 9:30 a.m. The last two in particular, the companion pass and that ability to get on a bus before 9:30 a.m. and, for example, get to a hospital, feels like they feel like quite good value options in terms of the advantages they give to residents in those particular circumstances. So I just wondered why, in the grand scheme of things, those two in particular, the companion pass and the pre-9:30 start on routes with infrequent services, were being withdrawn. It may be a very small number of people and it may be a small number of companion passes, but it feels like it has quite a disproportionate potential impact.
Lisa, are you able to answer that question? Or Patrick?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Todd. Could I just take the first question first of all, and I'll hand over to Lisa to cover the second question on concessionary passes. So the first one, in respect of funding from partners, if I understand your question correctly, as we've had to develop these proposals off the back of the feedback that we've had from the consultation responses, it has not been possible for us to engage those partners in developing them because of the sensitivity and the nature of that, and the fact that we didn't want to prejudice or prejudge any decisions or any proposals put forward to Cabinet. So we actually haven't been engaged in discussing these proposals with partners, which includes the districts and the boroughs, but also includes the voluntary sector and operators, for example. But if these proposals go through Cabinet and subject to the decisions they make, of course, there'll be discussions that take place with those partners and also with the operators and with the CVS as part of that. But any decisions they make will be subject to their own decision-making process, their own democratic process. Just moving to the concessionary passes, I think you made the point, Councillor Todd, that it doesn't seem good value to remove them. We've had to look at all discretionary funding and all discretionary spend that we put across the whole passenger transport side and have tried to derive proposals that really try and address that to make the best use of the money that we have, given the circumstances we find ourselves in. But for those specific ones, Lisa, are you happy just to pick up those three specific points, please?
So the three that are in the report that are proposed for removal are the only enhancements remaining to the English National Concessionary Travel Scheme in Hampshire. That's why they've been selected. That is the only way in which we enhance the scheme beyond its statutory obligations. You're right in that the companion passes have a very low uptake. Our view, based on the results of the consultation and general knowledge of the scheme, is that the majority of people who need a companion, those companions probably already entitled to their own bus pass. Therefore, the need for a companion pass is lessened. Those people with a disability who will have to pay for their journeys pre-9:30 and after 11 p.m. Our research shows that there are very few journeys made on bus by bus pass holders after 11 p.m. anyway. And the pre-9:30 journey, certainly at the moment, until the government make any decision, that impact is mitigated by the existing £2 fare cap. So whilst those people would have to pay for their journey pre-9:30, so maybe their outgoing journey but not their return, there is at the moment the fare cap in place, which means that the amount they're paying is limited.
Thank you. Are there any other questions that anyone has? Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Just sort of, and thank you very much, by the way, for taking on board some of the feedback and going back and having a look at the community transport. I would have quite liked to have seen that risk assessment, and that was one of the recommendations of the working group. Come back to the committee, because that's what we asked for. Because I think some of these questions that we've been asking might have been answered through that. And perhaps even this one I'm about to ask. Now, we're taking some of the concessionary bits away from people, and predominantly that's going to affect people prior 9:30 is in essence. And our sort of innovative solution with respect to community transport is to, and for those who want to play along, it's page 100 of our papers, para 61, is that what we will try to do is to have community transport operating in the times outside school transport, which means another double whammy for people who need to do things before 9:30 really. Now, typically users of community transport might have been going to doctors, dentists, all sorts of things. You know, they do actually offer appointments at hospitals and everything else at 9 o'clock in the morning. And so, with a HASCAT on as well, in terms of risk assessment, what do we know about the usage of community transport in those sort of times that we're thinking, the pre-9 o'clock and the sort of 2:30 and afterwards, where you're thinking, well, that's going to be taken up for school transport instead. How many users have we identified will be impacted, or have we not actually been able to do that?
So there's a number of different answers to that question. Firstly, not all schemes start before 9 o'clock at the moment. So in many cases across the county, it isn't possible to travel that early. The exception probably is Basingstoke, which has a much more extensive service than the other areas due to historical reasons. In terms of how many different users will be impacted, we do know how many people travel each hour on our services, and our new booking software will enable us to have that information much more more readily. So we'll have that guide. Could you repeat the second half of the question, because I've just forgotten it?
It's about, have we identified the potential risk to these service users? Because obviously, from a HASC point of view, we were very concerned about our community that tend to need to use perhaps adult social care, those sorts of things. And I know it's a hard thing to make those connections, but clearly it's an important one that we do, and we don't have any, because we don't have the risk assessment to see, and we haven't viewed it, it's difficult to assess.
I've remembered what I was going to say now, thank you. So yes, we don't know yet the full impact, because what this model will depend on is exactly what school contracts we pair with exactly what community transport services. So for example, take Basingstoke as an example, because I've started there. If you had a school contract where you had special educational needs children travelling from addresses in Basingstoke to a school in Basingstoke, that might only take half an hour or maybe an hour. But if you have a slightly longer contract, it might take longer. So before we can fully understand the impact to the people travelling, we need to properly understand which contracts will be assigned to which vehicles and which schemes, and therefore we can then look against the usage of those schemes and how those passengers will be impacted. But it's still going back to my earlier point about the new booking software. Yes, it won't help where the scheme is unavailable, but we hope to be able to, if we do have a kind of squished time that community transport operate, we hope to fit more people travelling within those hours so that those people aren't impacted. And community transport is, where it's demand-led, it's always quite difficult for appointments anyway, because if you need to get somewhere for 9 a.m. and someone's already booked the vehicle at that time, you can't always rely on it. And the passengers are used to that kind of uncertainty until you can book as to whether they can access appointments.
Councillor Taylor.
One final question, if I can, around risk assessments. I mean, obviously, it's, you know, the risk assessments across communities show that our transport recommendations have significant impact. I was wondering, as well as looking at the impact on groups of types of people, whether we've considered the impact across communities or areas, because I think the point that Councillor Wallace was trying to raise is the sort of double whammy effects on areas. So I think it's Meon Valley he represents. If we're taking lots of things out of that particular area, have we done a risk assessment to see what that cumulative effect by area might be?
Yes, we have looked at what that means for Hampshire as a geography, and generally these will impact people who live in rural areas the most, because our services that we currently support are mainly aimed at rural areas, because if you live in an urban area, then you're more likely to have a commercial bus service. So there is an impact more widely on rural areas, and our mitigation for that is that the vast majority, in fact all apart from one of our community transport schemes, operate on a district and borough-wide basis. So regardless of the areas that the services are being removed from, there is still a fallback service in respect of community transport for those users. So that's the mitigation.
Thank you. Can I ask a question, Lisa, on item 68 on page 100 about the funding of these booking software? There's a little phrase about that funding if it's no longer available. Can you just answer the question about a ring-fence government grant for the booking software, just to confirm that in all circumstances that funding is available, because the report says it might not be? Thank you.
Sure. The reason the report said it might not be was because it is future transport zone funding that was bid for and successfully won by Solent Transport. And there was a question at the point that this report was written as to whether the Solent Transport future transport zone funding would be extended or not. The government has since decided that it will be, and so yes, that funding will be there.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions for the officers on the report? Councillor Wallace.
Sorry to labour the point. I wanted to go back about the mitigation, the community transport. So there are currently two community transport vehicles that cover the whole of the Winchester district. It's estimated that if one of those vehicles goes out into my area, it will take the minibus out for half a day. We're really saying that the community that option is mitigating the whole risk of removing all these different bus services that have been put, because my understanding is a lot of the funding for these bus services is there specifically because the community transport system cannot really cope out there.
Lisa.
I think we're saying that's the best possible mitigation we can offer given the financial situation facing the council.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, I can't see any other hands up or waiting, I'm going to invite Councillor Branson to read out her amendment. Hopefully members have a copy of this amendment. Has it been emailed?
Put it up on the screen.
I will apologise. It's going to be put up on screen. So
I'm happy to read it while that's happening.
let's read it and hopefully it'll be on the screen shortly.
Yeah. In view of the representations received from the chairman of the Children and Young Persons and Health and Adult Services Select Committees, the Universal Services Committee requests the Cabinet to look again holistically at passenger transport proposal before making any decisions. The Universal Select Committee requests the Cabinet to consider the impact of passenger transport on all services affected by the proposals in order to achieve a more joined-up service for all children and adults and to ensure efficient use of council resources. This should ideally include home-to-school transport. The Cabinet reviews the effect of all services to ensure social care service users are not adversely impacted, especially those with special needs and disability, but also considers the effect of withdrawing these services on mental health, loneliness and rural communities. Should any decision to reduce passenger transport be made. The select committee affected by those decisions review the impact on the service and service users 6 months after any decision is made. I think there's a couple of grammatical errors I would change.
Thank you, Councillor Brunson, for reading that out. I will just give members a couple of seconds just to read that and digest that. And while you're doing that, I'm going to invite members to take part in the debate on the report and on that amendment at the same time. So the debate is covering both the report and that amendment. Yes, hang on a second. I apologise. I need to see a seconder for that amendment. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Henderson, thank you. I apologise. I'm also going to call, are there any other amendments that anyone wishes to put forward? Councillor Taylor. Can you take your microphone, please?
Just assume everybody can always hear me. Yes, she says. Now, strictly speaking, when we've been thinking about the recommendations, we've been referring to the pages where the cabinet recommendations are. Our recommendations, I think, start on sort of page 3 and 4 of our papers. And I'm mindful about the conversation that we had about delegated decisions before, and about the fact that we're having an additional suggestion here for recommendations. And my amendment would be to remove from this committee's recommendations any reference to delegated authority, because I believe that's a matter for Cabinet to decide how they want the decision-making process to work. I think ours is about the actual cuts and things like this. So that's what I would want to make an amendment, would be to remove bullet point on page, it'll be page 5, I think, to remove the bullet points, the last 2 bullet points of our recommendations, which, let's count the bullet points, I suppose, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5 and 6, which start with the authority is delegated to the Director of Universal Services, and the next one, the authority is delegated to the... So it's just to delete those from our recommendations to Cabinet, because I think it's for Cabinet to decide on how they want to...
Thank you, Councillor. I'm given the advice that the recommendation on page 87 and or the amendment are that the Select Committee support the following recommendations to Cabinet. And therefore, I think the issue you're raising about the delegation process is one for the Cabinet to decide. We're supporting the recommendation to Cabinet to make their own minds up about how it's delegated. I think that's the legalese that we're working in. Is that clear? That we're making a recommendation to Cabinet. Cabinet have a process for delegation that they're in charge of, that we aren't seeking to change.
So that's my point. We shouldn't be seeking to make a recommendation on it.
I'd like to invite our legal advisor to make a comment on what is quite a complex legal issue that I think we are both struggling with a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor McAtter. So the recommendations you're being asked to support at this stage are the ones that will go forward to Cabinet. We're not making those decisions here, so it's right that they are phrased in the way that Cabinet will receive them, and that includes the delegation. So I think we're being asked to, whether we support the notion that Cabinet will then further delegate. If you don't agree with that, then an amendment would be appropriate, but I don't think that's what you're saying, Councillor Taylor.
Sorry, Kim, can you turn your microphone on?
I'm ever so sorry. Until I used to be a teacher and just shout. The last point is that the delegated authority also includes making decisions whether to retain services or make variation to services. rather than withdraw the service. Now, given the nature of what we're doing, given the risk of what we're doing, I'm not sure that should be delegated authority. I think if we've got proposals in front of us that we're recommending and they subsequently get
Councillor,
changed.
that is clear. I'm going to suggest we do two things. First of all, we have a debate, and then we have a comfort break for 5 minutes to discuss that issue with the legal team and then come back. So I'm going to suggest we go through the debate now. When the debate is concluded, we then have a 5-minute break for that issue to be discussed and then come back on that issue if everyone is happy with that. So I'm going to suggest... Plan B. We're going to have a 5-minute comfort break at this point. So we're coming back at, in 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time and your patience, everyone. I think we've come to a conclusion about where we are. The proposal in front of you as an amendment is designed to replace in its entirety the recommendations on page 89 of the report. So the scrutiny committee has an amendment in front of it, which is on the screen, which is designed to be an amendment which can be supported or voted against by members of this committee, about that being the recommendation of the committee to Cabinet. So if that's clear, I hope that clarifies Councillor Taylor's issue about the delegation of point 6, that if this is accepted by the committee, then it replaces the recommendation. If it doesn't, then we can vote on the recommendation subsequent to it. But I think that resolves your problem, your question, Kim, successfully. Is that clear to everyone? And we're now going to go into I've been advised that I once again need to call for a second of this amendment proposed by Councillor Branson for this amendment that's in front of us before we get into debate. Thank you for Councillor Henderson for seconding it. Before we get into debate, I believe that Councillor Parker has a question.
Councillor Parker does. It occurs to me that the first two recommendations are noting the outcome of the consultation, noting the changes. Presumably those two recommendations will still stand, and that therefore when we get to what is on 89, 4, 5, 6 and 7, saying carefully reading it, noting that some numbers sometimes don't match, that this is presumably replacing those, or have I got that wrong?
Thank you. That's an extremely good point, Councillor Parker. We will ask Councillor Branson if she'd like to add items 1 and 2 to the top of her recommendation. Councillor Branson.
I'm happy to do that if that's what the committee wish.
Let the amendment therefore be changed to add items 1 and 2 on the current recommendations to the recommendation. Councillor Todd.
Can I be super pedantic? Yeah.
Please do.
Actually, the recommendations that we're being asked to support, what we're being asked to do is the resolutions relating to the meeting are actually on page 4 of the report, since they relate to the overall recommendation. Now, the slight problem is that the first two bullets come in the context of supports the recommendations made by officers to the Cabinet, which isn't actually listed as what's in the set of recommendations. So that's actually what we're replacing. Recommendation 2 is what's being replaced. We can then decide to keep the first two bullets because we're noting things. I don't think it's particularly important. But in practice, what we're doing is agreeing a new recommendation 2 because I don't think we support.
The point's extremely well made. I think you're technically right. The full recommendation for the report is replicated twice, both on page 89 and on page 4, I guess.
Well,
item 2 on page 4 of our report. Item 2 supports the recommendation is detailed on page 4. That is then repeated on page 89 in its entirety. So it's effectively the same thing twice. So I just need to check again with Susie Hannon to make sure which one we're actually replacing. I thought we were voting on page 89. That's what my notes had. But we may be voting on page 4. So let me quickly check that. Miss Hannon.
Oh. Thank you. I'm just looking at the report before the committee, which I think is item. Just bear with me, please. I think the recommendations that we are looking to consider are on page 89 of the agenda
Thank
pack.
you. Is that clear? You can, Councillor.
I don't think we are doing that. I'm with Councillor Todd on this. Sorry about that, because the items like 5A, 5B, those parts, the draft reports to the Cabinet are the officers' recommendations. That's their report and that's their recommendations. Our recommendations as a committee are set out on pages 4 and 5, and we have already voted on one, which is on page 4 rather, on 1, which was to relate 3 and 4, which is related to the winter gritting. We've already decided that. And our, as a committee, recommendations that we're now looking at are on page 4, continuing to page 5, which is our committee recommendation 2, that we support, and it starts off that we, as a committee, support the recommendations made by officers. And I think Councillor Brandt's amendment is that those words should be deleted and her words should be inserted at that point. So we can't change the officers' report and recommendations at all.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to agree with you. I think that page 4 is the simplest thing to amend, and therefore item 2 is what is being amended, and the change is those first 2 bullet points, which are to note the outcome of the 2024 Future Service Consultation in relation to the proposals for the future of the passenger transport provision, and the second part to note the changes to the proposals that were set out in the Future Service Consultation as detailed within the report as a result of the responses received. Those 2 will stand, and then will be followed by the 4 items. Councillor Taylor.
Sorry, our recommendation 2 starts off with the words supports the recommendations made by officers to Cabinet as set out in Appendix 3. This amendment does not support those. So actually we have to delete our committee recommendation 2 in its entirety and insert the amendment in its place.
So you're absolutely correct. I think the wording is spot on. Thank you for that. Is everyone clear about it? I apologise for the confusion here about the legal process, but I think Councillor Taylor is right that we aren't supporting the recommendations, and therefore item 2 is being replaced by this recommendation, by this amendment. If everyone is happy with that process. We're now going to go into the debate. If there's any more debate to be had about this process and about the thoughts on the amendment and or the substantive motion. Anyone wish to contribute to the debate? Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chairman. It was really to summarise that I'm supporting this amendment. I think if we're using the term universal services, we have to look universally across the county. And I feel that to date we've looked at transport in a very piecemeal approach. As my letter to you, Chairman, says, there is a wider piece of work needed to look at our adult social care transport, school transport, community transport, and a wider piece of work is really needed. But I would make a plea on behalf of the children and young peoples that, as Councillor Porter points out, that young people have a vital part in this discussion. I'd also like to thank Councillor Brantford for raising the issue of rural communities. I think we cannot underestimate the value we provide to our rural communities. So thank you, and I'm pleased to second this amendment and would encourage members to do so.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Parker.
Yeah, I have some misgivings, Chairman. And the misgivings are really that the purposes of this pre-scrutiny is to try to produce some recommendations to Cabinet that Cabinet can then use when coming to a decision. Now, we've been engaged on this exercise now for 6 months. And we're planning, we're intending to come to the end of it so we could address the budget for next and following years in order to make sure we serve the people of Hampshire properly whilst doing it appropriately economically. The problem with this amendment is we're basically saying we're not going to tell you what we think of the actual proposals. What we're going to say is you, Cabinet, have got to pre-scrutinise this again. And I'm not sure that Cabinet will find that extremely helpful. So I'm in two minds, Chairman, because I completely understand what Councillor Branson and Councillor Henderson are trying to achieve. I think the danger is that what it will actually achieve is kicking the can down the road.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Any other contributions to the debate? Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I fully support a holistic look at an integrated transport system between adult social care, home to schools, and also regular passenger bus transport. I believe that there are a number of projects that are looking at just that, and I feel that we could actually save quite a lot more money by looking at the thing holistically and benefit the whole community at the same time.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Groves.
Thank you, Chair. I would support, I think, this amendment as proposed. I think basically we do need to look at it more holistically. I think at the moment we don't, even though the work has supposedly been done to look at the impacts, we haven't actually seen it, and it would be a benefit for us to actually understand the issues and how school transport is going to be tied into community transport and whether it will work or not. There are a lot of flags in the report stating that there will be a reduced service, even though, it'll be a reduced service of community transport because it'll be less hours, and things will be reduced, even though it does sound a really good idea to tie the two together if you can make it work. But I think there are a lot of issues within that I'd like to address. You'd like us to talk on the substantive motion as well, is that right? So
that is absolutely, we're having a debate on both the amendment and the substantive motive, so you're absolutely correct, Councillor Groves. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd just like to carry on. I mean, I've had quite a lot of comments from residents about the proposals, particularly the services that are being removed altogether, which is quite clear in the report or quite clear in the recommendations to the report. Comments for residents point out how important the bus services are. Basically, I've had this comment. I was flabbergasted to read by chance about the reduced bus stagecoach service for the 46 and the 461. And this is just taking the 461 away, leaving the 46 there. This has already happened. The 461 service was for school children at Peter Simmons. That was one of the reasons for it. And that one's already disappeared. I mean, it's disappeared without any consultation at all. It just happened at the end of last term. Stagecoach said they weren't going to do it anymore from the beginning of September, and so we don't have that service anymore. And there's no school transport for the people from the west of Hiltingbury and Valley Park areas and Baddesley. This supposedly was the only, from what I'm told, the only commercial bit of the service anyway, and of course supposedly commercial, and that's been withdrawn. And now you're proposing to withdraw in this, or the recommendation is to withdraw the 46 service, which is only one per day in school days, which is ridiculous. And of course, you can't do a return journey on that because it goes from Winchester down to Valley Park and then back to Winchester. So you can't get to Winchester and back to Valley Park in the day, for example. So this is another comment. When my wife and I moved to North Millersdale in Chandler's Ford in 1996, one of the attractions was the good bus services. My wife doesn't drive and is disabled, so relies on buses. We were able to catch a regular 46 bus, even on a Saturday, all the way either into Southampton or into Winchester. When I started working at Southampton General Hospital, I could take the bus to work. Again, that's another point made by Councillor Irish on the Eastleigh service that goes past the hospital at the moment, but is proposed for being withdrawn. Over the years, the service has been eroded, but I always believed they would legally have to be a service for students to get to Peter Simmons, and of course that's disappeared anyway. I am therefore shocked to hear that this service is suddenly being stopped. And again, this comment here, the new 46 timetable, which is just this one a day, which you're proposing to withdraw, is poor and not joined up. When we use the bus, we find the 461 a timely bus to catch both ways. We are now cut off, except for the limited 44 service to Eastleigh, which is the one from Hiltingbury and Chandler's Ford to Eastleigh. And that, of course, is also proposed for withdrawing. And of course, that is a service that's 9 times a day, with a subsidy just of 7,400 in the table from Hampshire. It would make no sense at all to withdraw that, take away the 9,400. The 43 taxi service, which Lisa clarified, hasn't been used this last year. I mean, one of the reasons it will not have been used is because the 44 bus service was there and people could use that. And of course, also the 461, there's a possibility that could have helped. So specifically, the 44 service from Chandler's Ford and Hiltingbury to Eastleigh, I've had this comment since inception. With support from the parish council, the numbers using it have been steadily building. This model of local community transport that the 44 route exemplifies, but wouldn't work if it was combined with school transport, of course, because the service would be reduced and you would take it away from different times, has been bold and imaginative. Compared to dial-a-ride and shared taxi services, it's much more environmentally friendly in terms of fuel and emissions per passenger mile travelled. And with these services being cut, it becomes even more essential as affordable transport. The ability for especially elder folk to stay independent is a huge cost saving to Hampshire County Council, and that's the point made, and I think has come from some of the other representations made today. So I'm not in favour of the motion as a whole, but I do support the amendment going forward. Thank you.
Thank you to Councillor Groves. Councillor Irish, you have your hand up for the debate.
Thank you, Chair. It's very similar to what Councillor Groves has just said, actually. Chandler's Ford had no bus service to Eastleigh at all until the parish council came up with the idea of the 44 service, which they financially support, Eastleigh Borough Council financially supports, and up to now, the County Council supports. Now, it's the only bus to Eastleigh. It serves the Valmore estate, which is an area of high deprivation in my division, and it brings people into Eastleigh. It also takes people into the centre of Chandler's Ford, so they can catch the number 1 service to Southampton or Winchester and go to the railway station. So if we withdraw this bus from Chandler's Ford, there is no bus to Eastleigh, there is no bus for people to get to Asda, there's no bus for people to go anywhere at all. They can't even get down now to the regular service that goes through the centre of Chandler's Ford. So I really hope we could look at this quite carefully, because it's going to affect an awful lot of people. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson, you had your hand up again.
Thank you, Chairman. I would just like to point out that this recommendation, this amendment, sends a clear message to Cabinet. A wider piece of work is needed, and we are not using our transport budgets efficiently.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to... Councillor Taylor and Councillor Todd in that order. Councillor Taylor, Kim.
Thank you very much, Chair. I mean, I am supporting this amendment, and one of the key reasons that I'm supporting this amendment is that, having been part of the working group, and we gave this some consideration, we were very clear, and we were very clear in our report, which was accepted by this committee in our first meeting, that there needed to be an impact assessment of passenger transport proposals, and that it should be considered by us as a select committee before scrutiny of the proposals and any recommendations made to council, so cabinet rather. So I am accepting this amendment because I think that it gives effect to the work of the working group. And I would, to Councillor Parker say that we are not amending the officers' report. The officers' report will be the officers' report. That is, they will make their arguments to Cabinet, and they will make those recommendations to Cabinet, and it's for them to convince the Cabinet that those are the right recommendations that we're making. Our recommendations are that we believe that this piece of work needs to be done. And I think that's fair, and I think it reflects the work of the working group for that. It's entirely a matter for Cabinet whether or not they choose to accept our recommendations or not. They are advisory. Turning now to should this amendment fail, then the substantive motion continues, and obviously I have already raised the issues of the delegated decisions in bullet point 5/6, depending on what number you're reading, and I would just say to members that I would hope that should this amendment fail, that we will vote on those items individually. I will vote against those items because I think constitutionally we have a decision-making process in our constitution which sets out how delegated powers will be used and how decisions will be made, and I think that that is what we should use, and other than it's not for this committee to go beyond that, and if any changes to be made to that or Cabinet wish to provide delegated decisions for different things, that's a matter for them. It's not a matter for us, so I would vote against those and urge others to do so. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. If the proposed amendment is not successful, we will vote item by item for the recommendations, which are numbered on page 89, but are actually listed on page 4 without numbers. Councillor Todd.
Yes, I will also be supporting the amendment. I think what we've heard very clearly, and it's been very helpful hearing from colleagues in the Chandler's Ford area, is how it's the intersection of all these different proposals together on a particular geographical area, and particularly as it relates to the more vulnerable members of our community, that is the greatest cause of concern. And going through each of them in turn and saying, okay, this is the impact of this change, this is the impact of this change, this is the impact of this change, doesn't do justice to the combined impact. And again, I think if we look at some of the well-being and impacts, the wider well-being impacts, you know, the withdrawal of the companion pass, the not disabled people not getting a pass in impact before 9:30 a.m. There will be people for whom work is a hugely beneficial thing for their well-being. There will be people for whom that ability to get out and travel and be able to use services to get around and get out of their own home will be hugely beneficial. And it feels to me that we haven't thought about those wider impacts. And I'm very pleased that the Children and Young People and the Health and Adult Service Select Committees have chosen to say, you know, this is a holistic view that we need to take. And I think the impact assessment that was talked about, which needs to take a geographical focus, is a really helpful request that's been made, and is effectively, I think, something I would see as being repeated in these recommendations. So I'm firmly of the view that we should pass these recommendations and pass this amendment. And in the event that we don't, I'm not able to support the recommendations in their current form because effectively for the reasons highlighted, and because I think the impact on some of the measures, I'm not entirely sure what I'm signing up to. And on others of the measures where I can see what I'm signing up to, I'm very concerned at the impact on some of the most vulnerable members of our community.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Does any other member wish to take part in the debate? Councillor Wallace.
There we go. Right. Thank you. I'd just like to say again, thank you to the officers for the work extra work they've put into getting to these recommendations. We all appreciate, you know, there's been a lot of work trying to get it, but we have a responsibility here to represent our communities, and what we're being asked to do today under the original proposal is not something that I can support. Just talking to one of the people who uses one of the services that we're planning that is planned to be cut in the original amendment, is in the original proposal. She said, if I can't get out, I may as well sit in my chair and wait to die. Now, we've heard about potential mitigations, but actually I honestly don't believe those mitigation measures would work in our area. 2 minibuses is just not practical for covering the whole of Winchester and moving our vulnerable residents around. So we have the 3 main reasons I'll be pushing back. It's hitting our most vulnerable residents. It disproportionately affects our rural communities, which have already seen massive cuts in our bus services already. Many of the villages I represent don't have bus services anymore, and some of the community transport that is there is the only service that is remaining. Others, the bus service has been slashed. We don't have buses to many parts of the district anymore. And there's also, it's obviously contrary to the aims of this council's local transport plan as well. So there are for all those reasons, it doesn't make sense to move forward with these proposals, but I will be happy to support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Before I go to invite Mr. Blogg to make some closing remarks, I'm going to make a comment. We're all very aware of the financial situation the council finds itself in, and we have immense sympathy for the officers with the task they are faced with about how to reduce the costs of the council. But I think that the message that this scrutiny committee is putting forward is that passenger transport is a hugely important issue to significant numbers of our residents, and we feel that actually more work potentially can be done by the officers in different parts of the council to try and come up with slightly different solutions to those that perhaps the consultation had led to. And I think that's the message we very much heard from the questions today and from the debate. I'm going to invite Mr. Blogg to make any closing remarks. Patrick, would you want to make any closing remarks?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to members for all the contributions. It's always really interesting to hear the debate and the feedback. I was just going to summarise by raising that point you made, Chair, about the financial backdrop, and I think I used it in my opening words for both of the papers and where we find ourselves at the moment. And I think what we've seen today and what you see in the report in front of you is we worked very hard from the proposals that were put forward originally in the consultation, the 1.7 million, and the feedback from the consultation, which really helped inform some what I think has been really innovative thinking on behalf of the teams to try and come up with something with the resources that we have and the challenges that we face, which really starts to look at that. And I've heard the word used a few times here, that holistic view about how we can make it work across the county, school transport, community transport, and so on. And therefore, the proposals put forward really started to address that point and start to work out those points around not just how they can be delivered, but how some of the impacts that we saw from the consultation could be mitigated. So, I think what you see is a really good response to what is a very difficult financial challenge, where we've had to look very, very carefully at our discretionary funding and work out ways where we can use the funding that we have to best effect, but unfortunately have to put some proposals forward for that discretionary funding which do have an impact, but trying to mitigate some of the worst effects of that impact. But that is all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to invite Councillor North. Kirsty, do you want to make a comment now, or do you want to wait till the end of the after the voting?
Thanks, Rob. I'll speak after the vote.
Thank you very much. So, moving on, we're now going to vote on the amendment in front of us. Is everyone clear that is replacing item 2 on page 4 of the papers of today? Those items are largely repeated with slightly different numbering on page 89, but what we're actually voting on is page 4, item 2. So we have a proposer, Councillor Branson, we have a secretary, Councillor Henderson. Can I have a show of hands, please, for those in favour of that amendment? Thank you. Those against that amendment and abstentions? Thank you very much. That amendment is carried. The joy of the process of local government at times. That is now the substantive motion in front of the committee, rather than the motion on page 2, which it has replaced. Therefore, can I have a show of hands for those now in favour of that substantive motion, please? Thank you. That is unanimous. That is therefore carried. Thank you very much. I'm now going to invite Councillor North, as Executive Member, to say a few words. Kirsty.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Chairman, members, thank you for the opportunity to speak here today in my role as Executive Lead Member for Universal Services. I'm speaking not only in relation to my own portfolio area, where I have responsibility for passenger transport, but also on behalf of my Cabinet colleague here today, Councillor Lulu Baumann, with responsibility for highways and waste, who will be taking careful note of today's feedback in response to proposals for highways winter services, and notes the committee's interest in further engagement through its work programme on Priority 2 and community routes. Thank you for your thoughtful discussions today. As public servants, our duty lies in doing the best possible job for Hampshire's residents. And in the context of the considerable annual budget deficit we face from 25-26 onwards, with ever increasing costs of delivering social care to vulnerable adults and children, placing considerable pressure on our budget. The diligent democratic scrutiny you have undertaken today, and indeed previously as part of the working group, Together with your engagement, dedication and commitment to this work is evident. Please be assured that your voices and views have been heard. Thank you to the Health and Adult Social Care Select Committee and the Children and Young People Select Committee for their letters, showing the strength of feeling across the Council on passenger transport, and to you all for incorporating their thoughts in your own deliberations this morning for a whole Council holistic approach to passenger transport. Thanks to Councillor Porter for making a deputation here today. When Cabinet meets next month to consider all of the savings proposals being put forward in the main report by officers, we'll be reflecting on these issues you have raised today very carefully. This is a responsibility we take extremely seriously, and we will also consider extremely carefully the responses received during the public consultation held at the start of the year, the media reports in relation to the proposals, and the potential impact on residents were they to go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor North. That concludes the meeting, and I would ask the webcast to be ended